It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Happy August 10th, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome in to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show exclusively on the Better Sports Network and some FFPC social media channels as well. I'm your host, Eric Balkman. You know me from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and I am joined tonight by a guy who you know from the Fantasy Sanctuary. You know him from Football Outsiders. You know him from Fantasy Pros. Please welcome in. You already follow him on Twitter, by the way, at NFL_T-Strack. It is the incomparable Tom Strachan. Tom, welcome in, man.
Thanks for having me, and I truly appreciate you pronouncing my name right. That's one which a lot of Americans struggle with.
I am not a lot of Americans, although I will screw up a lot of other stuff tonight, Tom, just to make up for it. So you say this. Now, let the listeners know you are in the United Kingdom right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. I live in Newcastle in the northeast of England. Lived here for vast majority of my life, and this is good. This midnight my time, it's slowly just changing my body clock, getting ready for the season to start, and get an awful lot less sleep for 17 weeks.
Yeah, this is so wild. So I want to get into it. Number one, I want to tell you right now, my sister-in-law she used to live just outside of London. Don't ask me where, because I will forget. She literally just moved to the States here. What is today, the 10th? She got here yesterday. And because she married, obviously, my brother-in-law, and it's kind of a weird situation that I have you on tonight, right the day after she gets here from the United Kingdom. How does a guy overseas, across the pond, get into the National Football League?
So, I mean, I kind of got into it way back in like 2006 or so. I was at university playing soccer on a soccer team, as plenty of people over here do. And a couple of friends on the soccer team got me into watching it a little bit. We used to have a big Super Bowl party every year for the entire football team, which would always get a little bit wild. People would come away with shaved heads, mohawks, various sort of like eyebrows shaved off or whatever. And for a few years, it just slowly kind of built for me, being more and more interested. I went to some of the very first London games when the NFL was coming over here. And then I discovered the Baltimore Ravens, who really sucked me in. Like Ed Reed and Ray Lewis they were the first players. But when I watched it as a casual viewer, and it's a tricky game to get into, but they forced me to take notice of the defense. They forced me to pay attention to that side. And then it kind of, I was a casual fan for a while. And then, like many things, COVID hit. I work in the TV industry by day, and everything shut down for 6-7 months. And I was looking for things to do. Started doing little bits of blogs and writing about fantasy NFL and stuff like that, and it just kind of grew and grew, and here we are a couple of years later, and people keep wanting to hear what I've got to say.
I promise the viewers tonight we will get into fantasy football, but two quick questions as a follow-up to this. Number one, you work in the television. You are an award-winning television editor, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I work in TV drama as an editor. I've kind of worked on a lot of kids dramas and a lot of things that people over this side of a pond would know, but nothing that's kind of made it over to your side yet. But that's the goal, to get onto the big stuff.
And the big stuff, like right now, there's a huge strike going on in the States, as I'm sure you're aware of. Are you guys noticing, or I don't even know, is SAG-AFTRA, is that like an international thing, or are you guys
definitely
noticing it is international? So you guys are feeling the same pain we are with content creation right now.
Yeah, definitely. And so many American TV production companies come over here because of tax schemes and bits like that, where they come over here to film, and we've got so many good studios. But it's rippling through the entire TV industry. I mean, I'm lucky that I'm working at the minute, but it's been by far the quietest year of my professional life. But on the flip side of that, it's meant that I had more time to get the Fantasy Sanctuary up and running on our YouTube channel. I've wrote more articles this year than I've ever wrote before, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of fun ingesting and consuming that content that you're creating, not only for the Sanctuary, but for Fantasy Pros as well. And how much are you still doing with Football Outsiders? I know you still dabble in with those guys, right?
Yeah, I haven't wrote for them since the last bit I did was the Super Bowl.
Okay.
With Champion Game.
think we have Tom frozen? Anthony, you can weigh in on this. Is it just frozen for me? Okay, it's frozen. Okay, let's see. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. Tom is gonna bounce out. We're gonna hopefully get a better internet connection. God, who foresee this, right? When you're across the pond, you're trying to figure the internet connection out. I will tell everybody this: that in the FFPC this year, a company I work for, you can win a pair of $1 million grand prizes. One in the Fantasy Pros Championship, one in the FFPC main event. This is something that we've done $1 million in the FFPC main event before. That was just last year for the first time. And then the FFPC or the Fantasy Pros Championship, this is the first time we've ever done it. So literally you can win $1 million with just a $350 entry fee, which is pretty cool. And those drafts are filling up. They start up right around, I think 1 p.m. Eastern time on weekdays, 11 a.m. on weekends. You won't be waiting long on those drafts when you register for those for sure. So register for those at myffpc.com. If you want to play fantasy football 365 days a year, make sure you are registering for the Dynasty Leagues over at myffpc.com. They start out at $100 for an entry fee. They go all the way up to $5,000. So whatever your budget is, you'll be able to get in on that for sure. Right now, again, myffpc.com. We've been doing Dynasty Leagues for well over a decade. 1,400 plus leagues, not a single one has ever folded. So again, if you want to play fantasy football, Dynasty, main event, Fantasy Pros Championship, either one of our best ball tournaments, closed 12-team leagues, Terminator, Varsity, Big Payback, High Society, Super Bracket. We have a ton of formats over at myffpc.com. And I would invite you to get in now because we are roughly 1 month until the start of the season. We're not far away. So make sure you are getting over to myffpc.com and registering there. Okay, while Anthony tries to get Tom to reconnect, let me tell you what's coming up on the show tonight. We're going to go through training camp news. Obviously, there's a ton going on. We have our first full-fledged NFL preseason weekend. We got the Hall of Fame debacle behind us with the lights going out and everything. So we're going to analyze what's going on, what's been going on in training camp, what to watch for here in the first week of the of the fantasy football season. And then coming up in the second hour, this is something I've been trying to do a little bit more of, the running back report. I think running backs are, whether you believe in zero RB or whether you robust RB or whatever, I think running backs are very, very important to fantasy success, whether you're waiting on them or whether you're drafting them early. And I think sometimes because of the opportunity that is presenting itself at that specific position, you can really make or break your draft. Well, maybe not break it, but definitely make it with the right running back selection. So we'll get into a bunch of running backs all the way from Jonathan Taylor down to Chase Edmonds. So every single point of the draft we'll be touching on tonight with Tom. Where do you stand on segment? We'll be back. We're going to find out where Tom stands on certain players, including but not limited to A.J. Dillon, Rashad Bateman, Kyle Pitts, and many more. And then if you're not familiar, and you should be by now because the Better Sports Network has been re-airing a lot of our live broadcasts that we did of the 2023 FFPC Pros versus Joes Challenge. This pits 42 industry pros versus 42 FFPC Joes in 7 separate leagues. The winner of each of those leagues will get a free entry into the 2024 FFPC main event. I'm repping the Pros versus Joes swag tonight right now. Shout out to Darren Armani from Fantasy Mojo for hooking me up with this. But each one of those league champions will end up getting a free FFPC main event entry and compete for $1 million grand prize next year. Tom is in one right now. He's in the slow draft. It's still going on right now. We'll get his thoughts on it coming up in the final segment of today's show because he's put together a very interesting squad, a very good squad too, and some interesting picks there that I want to touch on as well. Tom is back here right now. Tom, let's get into it here right from the start. This is something that I feel like a lot of high-stakes players, I know you're paying attention to this as well, the Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers. Sky Moore, according to Jesse Newell, who covers the Chiefs, said that Moore is actually seeing every single rep with the first-team Chiefs offense, Patrick Mahomes, when they have 2 receivers on the field. It's been him and Marquez Valdez-Scantling with Justin Ross mixing in later, with Rashee Rice mixing in later. Sky Moore. So this is a guy that I think is pretty compelling. And when you look at this, Tom, he has ascended up to, God, I want to say, I should look it up right now on Darren Armani's Fantasy Mojo website here. But he is like going in the 8th round right now. I'm going to look at it right now just to make sure I'm not butchering that. But Sky Moore has moved up to the end of the 8th round, early 9th round, wide receiver 45. And I got to tell you, they invested heavily in the draft capital last year to get Sky Moore, and now he's on this team With now he's on the first team this year. This is a player that we should be paying attention to. And I got to be honest with you, I think this guy is going to rise up even more in drafts. Get your shares of Sky Moore now before he goes up. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of hit a point where it's definitely an easier click now than it was at a certain point a few weeks ago. I think, you look at what he did last year. We know that rookies struggle to make an impact under Andy Reid at times, but he played 47% of his snaps from the slot. And with Juju Smith-Schuster moving on, it just feels so easy to allocate him a larger portion of them. It would have been a lot easier to buy into the hype if he'd had a real breakout last year, but he only had one target inside the red zone, scored his only touchdown in the Super Bowl. But you look at what the Chiefs have, and you're talking about Kadarius Toney, who can't stay healthy, and then you've got MVS, who's locked into the vertical part of the Chiefs' plans, and then you're talking about Rashee Rice and other players who really, Richie James could be a slot monster. We saw him have a really good season with the Giants last year. But the Chiefs have draft capital invested in Sky Moore, and I'm convinced that they do want to see that come good.
When you look at the Kansas City Chiefs ADP wide receivers, strictly wide receivers, the number one wide receiver being drafted in Kansas City right now is Sky Moore. He's moved ahead of Kadarius Toney, who has fallen basically to the mid-9th round as opposed to the early 9th round where Sky Moore is going. Rashee Rice is a mid-12th round pick. Justin Ross is going in the mid-16th, Marquez Valdes-Scantling the end of the 16th, and Richie James in the middle of the 18th. It's not often that you see 6 receivers being drafted from one team in a 20-round, 12-team draft like the FantasyPros Championship, but we're seeing it right now, and right now Sky Moore is leading it. So, and I'm telling you, I agree with everything you're saying. If you are drafting this weekend or drafting tonight in the FantasyPros Championship, get Sky Moore now because this guy has 7th or maybe even 6th rounder written all over him. All right, I know you have some. I shouldn't put words in your mouth, Tom. I feel like you have some strong-ish feelings on the Chicago Bears offense this year, and I'm going to kind of let you wax poetic however you want on it, but with knowing that the reason we're talking about it here is Chase Claypool apparently had a hamstring injury yesterday. I don't know if he practiced today. I don't know how, basically from the beat writers I'm seeing, it wasn't a serious thing. But what's interesting about the Bears is it is like brand new this year. Like you're looking at Justin Fields trying to become the prolific passer that he was at Ohio State, in addition to what he was already giving you on the ground. DJ Moore is now a Chicago Bear. That didn't happen last year. Chase Claypool has the full offseason. He will be on the Bears for the full season this year. And oh, by the way, Darnell Mooney on the men, he's going to be back, and they just gave Cole Kmet a boatload of money. As you look at the Bears offense this year, and I've seen it from both ends, Tom, I've seen a lot of people talking them up. I've also seen a ton of people telling me to ignore them. Where do you fall in on the Bears offense?
I think it's completely fair to think that this Bears offense is going to take a step forward. They've done plenty of the right things around Justin Fields. They've put draft capital into the offensive line. They went out and they made acquiring a wide receiver 1 in DJ Moore a priority. But when you look at what's there after Chase Claypool, that's where I get worried about the passing game still, because the Bears traded what ended up being the 32nd overall pick to acquire Chase Claypool last year at the trade deadline, and then they didn't seem to have any idea how to use him. He went on the total 13 catches for 115 yards. And now that they've brought in DJ Moore, perhaps that suits Chase Claypool being a second wide receiver a little bit more. And I don't mind taking the occasional dart throw on him. We're only a few years away from him being like a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. And now he's going as wide receiver 83 in FFPC best ball. So I think it's completely fine to take shots at him if you're buying in on them. But, this Bears offense, they averaged 12.8 passes completed per game last year. Justin Fields was incredibly inefficient. He ranked way low towards the bottom of passing EPA numbers. So I don't, Justin Fields is being talked up as one of the people's favorites for betting in the MVP market. And that seems crazy because you'd really want him to be a far more efficient passer to be able to make that bet. So I'm kind of a little bit hesitant. I think I'm more interested in the running back position, to be honest, when it comes to the Bears. I think there's loads of opportunity and ambiguity across Khalil Herbert, Roshan Johnson, and even Donta Foreman.
Let me ask you this. When you talk about the Bears running backs, Khalil Herbert is the first off the board, but not until the 9th round, Tom. running back 39. Roschon Johnson has actually fallen. He was actually closing the gap between himself and Herbert. And now you see not Mooney. You see Johnson falling a little bit. He's now an early 12th round pick. So now you're talking about 2.5 rounds roughly separating those guys. And oh, by the way, don't forget about Deontay Foreman, who's going in the mid 14th round. What if somebody's drafting in the Fantasy Pros Championship for $1 million? What do you suggest they do in regards to the Bears running back situation, especially if they're a volume drafter, or maybe they're drafting a 3-pack where you get the $50 discount? If they're drafting multiple teams, would you advise, hey, maybe get a share of Herbert, maybe get a share of Johnson, maybe take a chance on Foreman late? Or are you kind of presiding over one of those three as the guy to own in Chicago this season?
I mean, my most aggressive stance is on Khalil Herbert there. I think we've seen him be efficient at times. You know, he outcarried David Montgomery at times last season. He outproduced him on a number of metrics. And I think now we're going to see Khalil Herbert with a real opportunity to shine. There's talk out of Chicago that Khalil Herbert's made massive jumps in terms of his pass blocking, and that Justin Fields has been using him as an outlet in training camp. And much as I don't want to buy into that too much, it's nice to see that as a positive report. I would also say, though, if you're building a team where you've got 3 running backs in the first 6 picks, Roschon Johnson is the kind of upside pick that I like adding for later on in the season, because he is the clear best pass protector on that team just from day one. And he is going to see the field. He's going to have a role. And it's not crazy to imagine a situation where by week 17, he's seeing the majority of the snaps out of the 3 of them.
And I think that's a good point to bring up too, because we're oftentimes we always look at the season as a whole, but quite frankly, Fantasy Pros Championship, you're drafting for those big money weeks at the end. And that's important to keep in mind when you're looking at these Bears running backs, of who is going to be the guy excelling in those money weeks. Now, money weeks, excuse me. Tom, we have a question in the YouTube chat from our good buddy Randy Miller. And he wants us to rank these guys for strictly PPR. So no tight end premium on this. 4 guys. It's Stephon Diggs. It's Travis Kelce. Bijan Robinson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'll go first on this. So I'm going to put Robinson first because I do like first-round running backs. I love the hero RB build. So I'm going to put Robinson first. I think if I had the choice between all 4 of those, again, in a non-tight end premium, I'm taking Kelce first. Non-tight end premium, I'm going to put Robinson first. After that, I think I'm still going to go Kelce, although it's close. I just think of the advantage that you have at tight end every single week in your league if you draft Kelce. I think I'm going to put Kelce here. Now, here's where it gets interesting. My brain tells me to put Diggs third, right? Because he's on this elite offense. He's got a great quarterback. That team is going to put up points. My heart is telling me Amon-Ra St. Brown. No, not because I'm a Packers fan, because then my heart would be saying, what are you putting Amon-Ra St. Brown up there for? But I'm going to say Amon-Ra St. Brown because I absolutely hate the Lions defense this year. I don't think they did enough in free agency. I think Gardner Johnson is all right. I think Campbell, the linebacker they got out of Iowa, is all right. I don't think it's enough, and I think they're going to be in a lot of shootouts this year. That said, I love Goff. I love Gibbs. I love Laporta. I love Williams to a certain point. And then for sure, Amon-Ra St. Brown. So my heart is saying, hey, you should put St. Brown above Diggs. Still can't do it. It's close for me. So I'm going to rank them, and these are all very close, obviously, as Randy Miller would tell us because he's asking us to. Very close. I'm going to go Robinson, Kelce, Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown. How do you have these 4?
Yeah, so in terms of my best ball rankings, which are up on Fantasy Pros and on my own website, nflbestball.co.uk, I've got Travis Kelce at 6, Bijan Robinson at 7, and then I have Diggs and then Amon-Ra St. Brown. But lately, I've been going back and forth this over the last couple of weeks, and I've got 15% exposure to Amon-Ra St. Brown and 5% exposure with Stephon Diggs, and I just don't feel comfortable clicking Diggs as often as I do the other guys. So I think he's going to slip past Amon-Ra for me because I just look at him, particularly in PPR, full PPR formats. He's just going to be a monster this year. We saw how incredibly efficient Jared Goff was in play action. We've seen all the reports that he's starting to develop more of a red zone bond with him. And Amon-Ra last year was tackled, I think it was something like 6 times inside the 5-yard line. Mm-hmm. Any kind of positive regression on that, and we're talking about just even more points for him.
Yeah, and I think it's going to happen too, for sure. So I think you might have sold me because I was kind of on the fence. I'm going to put St. Brown above Diggs at this point. It's just a weird vibe I'm getting out of Buffalo too. I don't have any fantasy analysis behind this. Just get a weird vibe from Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs this year, and I don't get that vibe in Detroit. I think there's problems with the Lions defense, which makes me like the offense on a team like that. So I'll put St. Brown above Diggs and agree with you there. Okay, let's go over to Cincinnati here. Adam Schefter from ESPN said, there is no update on Joe Burrow's timeline to return. Zach Taylor said he is several weeks from when he said several weeks, essentially. That's to be as nebulous as possible on this tweet from Adam Schefter. And I think not necessarily for Joe Burrow do I want to ask you this, because Burrow, it was weird because he was going above Lamar Jackson in the Fantasy Pros Championship when Jackson had his contract stuff going on. And then he got inked, and then he got paid, and then he started moving up. And then Burrow got hurt, and now they've totally flip-flopped. In fact, Burrow is in the early 5th round, where Lamar Jackson is now in the early 4th round. So Burrow is comfortably at quarterback 5, but the Justins are not too far behind him in Herbert and Fields. And now I'm hearing, and the stuff I've been reading, and Tom, you let me know what you think, but I don't even know if Burrow's going to be ready week 1. And if that's the case, now do we start drafting Herbert? Do we start drafting Fields above Burrow? And if that's the case, do we start bumping guys like Jamar Chase, guys like T. Higgins down our draft boards, knowing that, maybe it's okay if Burrow's only out a week or two, but if it's longer than that, all of a sudden we're putting a top 3, top 2, top 4 draft pick into Jamar Chase. That seems a little dicey to me. What's your read on the Burrow injury situation for the Bengals?
I think there's so much to dig into here because it would be incredibly disappointing for Joe Burrow to miss any time, particularly if you're investing that sort of round 5 pick. You want to start strong. You want to justify those picks early on. And when he is on the field, he's a safe bet to throw for like 250 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Like only 3 quarterbacks had more 250-yard passing games last year. Only 2 quarterbacks had more 2+ passing touchdown games. So we know what he is when he's out there. It's just kind of, can you build out your quarterback room in a way that can give you that get out of jail free card early on? So if you're going down the kind of RotoViz idea of 2 quarterbacks in a window and picking your second quarterback before like round 11, then you can and then stopping at 2 quarterbacks entirely for your team, then you can probably get away with it. I think that's fine. And I do think Joe Burrow is such a competitor that he's going to want to be out there. He's going to want to be on the field early. We saw how he recovered from his ACL injury last year when he had appendicitis. He doesn't want to be off the field. He knows that the AFC North is going to be a very competitive division, and he's going to do everything he can to make sure we're winning every single game. But if we get another week down the line and we're not getting any kind of hints of positive news, and if Cooper Kupp is suddenly back to practice and looking healthy, then I think Cooper Kupp's going to leave Jamar Chase for me.
What about, let's do a quick would you rather here. In the Fantasy Pros Championship, tight end premium, let's say you have the 3rd pick and Kelsey and Jefferson are gone, Tom. Would you take McCaffrey over Jamar Chase?
Not for me. That's kind of slightly lower on McCaffrey this year in general.
Is McCaffrey your number 1 running back this year?
He is my number 1 running back, yeah. I think for me it's kind of, but what the elite wide receivers give you at the top end of the draft, I'd still rather take Chase. I'd still rather take Tyreek or Kupp, because there's so much value at running back in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round at the minute.
Mm-hmm. What about who would you rather have? Let's take the Bengals out of it for a second. Who would you rather have, Tyreek Hill or Cooper Kupp this year? Let's assume that you're drafting later in the season or later in the drafting season, and Kupp looks like he's healed up. Would you take Kupp over Hill?
I mean, if Kupp hadn't got injured when he did, I was about a fraction away from naming him my wide receiver 1 overall, I think.
Okay. All right.
I think this Rams defense is going to be so bad. We saw last year that Kupp was incredible even when the Rams offense was awful. They put a bit of resources into their offensive line. Matthew Stafford's healthy, and they've added no competition whatsoever. Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson both have far better competition in their teams and their offense than Cooper Kupp does, and I just think Cooper Kupp could have another historic year if he's healthy.
If he's healthy, which is always the issue, and obviously not a young man anymore as far as football goes, turning 30 years old this year. Let's flip it to the Higgins discussion here real quick. He is going basically still ahead of Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen in that mid 3rd round area. I know how you feel about Burrow right now. But let's just say the news does not get positive. The deeper it goes into the season, are you more likely to draft Ridley or Metcalf or even Keenan Allen over T. Higgins?
I think Ridley is definitely somebody who's catching steam, isn't he? Everything we're hearing is positive, and we know how good he was when he was last on the field. He was incredible. So I'm not against that one. I think T. Higgins, we saw last year when Jamar Chase came back and was healthy after his hip injury, he was a complete target hog. He had like double-digit targets throughout the playoffs and the last few games of the season, apart from like one game. So I can see that one being where I'd be willing to make a bet on Calvin Ridley. DK Metcalf, I'm slightly lower than consensus on. I'm very high on Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett, so perhaps not there. But yeah, I'd be taking Devonta Smith ahead of T. Higgins as well if we get these kind of little bits of bad news.
Let's move on. Okay, I know that was sort of a quarterback question, but it really wasn't. Let me ask you a true quarterback question here. Anthony Richardson listed as the co-starter with Gardner Minshew on the initial depth chart from Colts.com. However, we found out that he is indeed starting the first preseason game, is Anthony Richardson. When you look at a player like him, in Richardson, I'm talking about here, Tom, he is going as a fringe starter, basically. He is the quarterback 12 right now, behind Tonga Bailoa, behind Prescott, but still ahead of Cousins and Daniel Jones. Let's expand this to an entire discussion of the Colts wide receivers as well. And maybe not the entire, maybe let's just talk about Pittman here. But Anthony Richardson as tight end 12, is he the type of guy, and I know you're the best ball expert, is he the type of guy that could be a league winner, right? If you nail that Richardson pick right. And then how are you treating Pittman based on how you feel about Richardson in drafts right now?
Yeah, so with Anthony Richardson, it just all comes back to the rushing. If they can get him rushing at a level where he's not getting injured, it's not affecting him to the point where, that's all he's got. Even when we saw Lamar Jackson come into the league in 2018, they were so scared to open things up for him that it really was just a very rushing-heavy offense all the way through to the playoffs, where eventually then they were down heavy against the Chargers and had to unleash it. But for fantasy, you look back at last year and there were 27 instances of a quarterback scoring 30 or more points during the fantasy season. Of those 27 instances, 2/3 of them, 18, featured a quarterback who rushed for 5 or more attempts. So we know that all the top fantasy performances from quarterbacks are coming from players who are able to add something more on the ground. But it's also the top 12 performances as well. Like last year, there were 80 instances of a quarterback who rushed for 39 yards or more, and 66% of them resulted in top 12 weekly finishes. So it just seems impossible to me that the Colts have this absolute unicorn of a player, this freak athlete who we saw just destroy the combine, that he's not going to be able to rush 6, maybe 7 times a game and pick up 30 to 40 yards on average, and then pick and choose his moments to pass. And there's a lot of people who seem to think that Anthony Richardson is a bad passer of a ball. He's definitely underdeveloped, but he's got a lot of good mechanics and a lot of things that go right at time. He just needs to find more consistency. But he's absolutely elite at avoiding sacks. And if you're not taking sacks, then you're not putting your offense into negative yardage situations, then you're not having to throw the ball more aggressively all the time, then you can keep just picking up the running game. I think I'd feel even more confident in Anthony Richardson if the Jonathan Taylor situation wasn't hanging over him.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the wide receivers, I sprinkle in some Michael Pittman. I don't have huge amounts of him. I'd say I'm probably at about 5 or 6% exposure across 200-300 drafts. I like taking shots on Alec Pierce for that kind of downfield role. I feel like, we've seen enough of Anthony Richardson's big arm to know that that could be quite an impressive combination if it hits. And I like sprinkling in a little bit of Jelani Woods at the back end of drafts as well.
Yeah, and tight end premium, obviously, not only for the Fantasy Pros Championship, but the FFPC Best Ball Tournament and the Superflex Best Ball Tournament. You're making a lot of sense there with Jelani Woods. I want to. There's so much good stuff here, Tom, and you're giving us great information. I want to keep this going here. Not again a non-quarterback question disguised as a quarterback question here for you. Baker Mayfield is actually going to be starting for the Buccaneers against the Steelers tomorrow night, according to Ian Rappaport on Twitter. Kyle Trask, I believe, is starting the second preseason game for the Buccaneers. And quite frankly, I don't know if it makes a difference because neither one of these guys have looked good in preseason. And the reason I bring this up is not necessarily for, I guess we can view this as a super flex question. Hey, which one should I take? I want to view this, let's big picture it, because I think we're concerned about the skill position guys and how this affects the guys in Tampa like Chris Godwin, Rachaad White, Mike Evans. I think these are the guys that we need to be looking at here. Godwin in the Fantasy Pros Championship is the first skill guy drafted by the Buccaneers, or first Buccaneer skill position guy drafted. He's going in the mid-6th. Mike Evans going as late as I've ever seen him. Or no, Godwin late 5th. Rachaad White mid-6th, and then early 7th for Mike Evans, wide receiver 32 for him. Are you downgrading these guys? It's tough. Like, it's so weird because, obviously the last couple of years we're like, oh yeah, give me some Chris Godwin, give me some Mike Evans, Tom Brady, baby, here we go. And like, it's weird for me to downgrade these guys as far as we have based on the quarterback situation. But I think that might be the proper way to go. And when I look at drafting players on great offenses, quite frankly, the Buccaneers don't qualify. I'm fading Godwin. I'm fading Evans. Am I wrong to do it?
It's really difficult because we know how good they are as players. Last year, Chris Godwin, coming back off his ACL injury, was somebody who I was quite confident in drafting. I felt like he was going to be okay for when it counts at the end of the season, and he was a good pick, and it was something which I was, one of my better calls last year. In terms of how I've approached this offense, I mean, I've been heavier on Baker Mayfield in 20-round format best ball, where I've taken Godwin, and I've not taken any Kyle Trask, because whereas, you look at these quarterbacks, and Kyle Trask wasn't even getting on the field over the last couple of years when he was there, and Tom Brady was taking days off. When Tom Brady was coming out of games, Kyle Trask was not on the field. Mayfield, I mean, we know what he is at this point in his career. He's a limited quarterback, and he'll roll out of a clean pocket and he'll just throw an interception straight into a defender who he should see. But Chris Godwin, I still feel like he can be fantasy viable. I think that we saw when Baker was with the Browns and things were going wrong at times, Jarvis Landry was still fantasy viable. That slot receiver role still worked. It was fine. And Baker was kind of at his best with the Browns when the offensive line was clicking. And this offensive line, they've poured resources into it. They're trying hard to take it from last year where it was decimated with injuries. And I think, they'll have a healthy Ryan Jensen. They're going to move Tristan Wirfs from right tackle to left tackle. And there's a chance, they added a couple of draft picks as well. There's a chance that this could be a top 15 offensive line. And if there's that, then perhaps we get just enough calmness from Baker Mayfield where he can dump off the ball to Chris Godwin, enough to be still a decent pick at that point. I think for me, where I like to take Chris Godwin is if you've started with a double running back build, or you've started like running back tight end running back, something like that, and you need a wide receiver for your wide receiver 3, I feel much better about him there. But if you've started with an extreme 0 RB build, taking him as like your 5th wide receiver, I'm not sure what he's going to give you over the likes of Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, where you're hoping that he's going to eclipse them at any point.
It's all about build, whether it's the Fantasy Pros Championship, FFPC best ball tournaments, or anything you're doing. It is all about your build. We could talk about these players in a vacuum all we want, but quite frankly, when you get to the point of the draft where you're thinking about Godwin, or you think about Evans, or even Rachaad White for that matter, it kind of matters what your team looks like up until then. Okay, last point I want to sneak this in before we take our first break, and this is more of a tight end question. Sean Payton, according to Chris Thomason, who covers the Denver Broncos, said that Adam Troutman, who is listed as the number 1 tight end on the first unofficial depth chart for the Broncos, has earned his starting spot because of what he can do in run blocking. And we look at that part of the quote and we're like, finally, clarity for the Broncos tight ends. And then he puts in, though multiple tight ends will play in the system. So annoying. Denver tight ends right now. Greg Dulcich, and I know it's been mostly positive from the high stakes players, although I've heard some more negative things from the beat writers in Denver about how Dulcich is doing. Dulcich is still going in the mid-10th round in the Fantasy Pros Championship, whereas you look at Troutman, wasn't even being drafted like a week or two ago. Now he is entered in as a late 19th, early 20th round pick. So basically a flyer at the end. This is not a question necessarily on what should we be doing with Troutman, Tom. This is a question of Greg Dulcich. Even in tight end premium formats, is the 10th round too high for him, knowing that according to the depth chart, albeit an unofficial one, he's not even the starting tight end in Denver. Do we need to be fading Greg Dulcich at this point?
I don't think so. I think this feels very much like kind of coach speak, sort of off-season fluff. I think, Adam Troutman was clearly a player who Sean Payton want. They went out and they traded from the Saints to get him, but they didn't give up an awful lot for him. It feels like Adam Troutman is the tight end that Sean Payton wants if he feels like Russell Wilson is unplayable and that they have to go extremely run heavy. Mm-hmm. So I think, for me, I'm still drafting Greg Dulcich. I'm taking the dip that we're getting on him. You look at what he did when he came in. He had 3 top 12 weekly finishes in consecutive weeks when he finally made the starting lineup after he'd got over his injury. He was a tight end 1 in 50% of the games he played. He can win near the line of scrimmage. He can win downfield. That's the kind of thing which I want from the tight end. I want those players who can get vertical and they're not just going to keep catching 5-yard outs for, 1.5 PPR points.
And it's important. It's an important thing to remember too that, and I always bring up this when we talk about training camp and how players are looking in training camp. Tom, at this point last year, we were making. Well, I don't want to lump you in it, but it was laughable to me to draft Josh Jacobs where he was being drafted because he was returning kicks at this point last year. This is crazy to think about. That a dude who is returning kicks in the preseason. I mean, this is the lowest form of low. This is the guy who is on his hands and knees with a dirty sponge, scrubbing up the most disgusting bathroom floors you can find. That's what Josh Jacobs was doing. And then what did he do? He was the king on the throne of the running backs last year, leading the NFL in rushing. And this is a reminder, as much as people want to downgrade Greg Dulcich right now, a lot of people out there do. I think you raise a good point. Not so fast, my friend. Maybe let's keep this dude in mind going forward, and maybe you can buy the dip on him for sure. We are just getting started here tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. When we come back, it is the running back report. We're going to get Tom Strachan's insight into a lot of the running backs that are making news right now, including Kenneth Walker, including Zamir White, Josh Jacobs. Let's talk about them as well. And then, of course, the Jerome Ford injury. We're going to touch on that, what it means for the rest of the Cleveland backfield, as well as Nick Chubb. You're watching the HSFF show right here on BSN. He's Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
Better Sports Network. Collectible moments.
Everybody up here at U.S. Cellular. Sox 5 runs, 6 hits. The 2-1 to Bartlett. Swing, chop to short. Ramirez has it, throws. Burley picks the perfect game. His second no-hitter. People going crazy here at U.S. Cellular. He's mobbed by his teammates. A perfecto.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right up, 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the impounding pass. Laid it up to DJ. DJ laid it up at him. And Boston has a 1-point lead with 1 second left.
Out of the I formation on first down. Peterson to carry, looking for running room on the right side, has it to the 25, across the 30, across the 35, and out of bounds at the 40-yard line. Adrian Peterson has just gone over 2,000 yards for the season, the 7th man in NFL history to cross the 2,000-yard mark.
Well, a thundering ovation for number 66, Mario Lemieux.
Just the emotion I'm sure Mario is feeling in this place. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, and it's so great to have Mario back.
Yager turns around. Over to Lemieux. Mario Lemieux, his first goal in his comeback here tonight at the Mellon Arena. And the Penguins lead 3-0, and he is smiling like a butcher's dog. Mario Lemieux.
Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. The Bears have scored, but the Bands are out on the field.
Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. You're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is sliding
slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? Pearson is still running. The winner is car number 21. An amazing finish. Richard Petty's car demolished in the front end, as well as car number 21. An unbelievable finish, a terrible crash. David Pearson has won the Daytona 500. Leitner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Leitner has hit the bucket at the buzzer!
Pitched by Downing, swinging. There's a drive into left center field. That ball is going to be out of here. It's gone. It's 7-15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
The most valuable player is Magic Johnson. 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. He starts at center, plays forward and guard, and leads the Los Angeles Lakers to a world championship 123-107 over Philadelphia.
Whether you collect sports memorabilia, fantasy championships, or winning bet slips, talk about it on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Thursday, August 10th, 2023. You'll always remember this day. Why? Because this is the day you started a free 7-day trial of Fantasy Alarm's All-Pro subscription to get the Fantasy Football Draft Guide and cheat sheet for free. Just go to fantasyalarm.com/draft, fantasyalarm.com/draft. I am talking with the football outsider himself. I am talking with the caretaker of the Fantasy Football Sanctuary. I'm also talking about one of the pros from Fantasy Pros. You follow him on Twitter at NFL_T-Strack, Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros, Fantasy Sanctuary, and Football Outsiders. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We were talking a lot about, normally I don't like to dedicate that much time to quarterback discussions in the first segment of the show. So I'm going through withdrawal right now. Let's go get into a little running back discussion here. And Tom, one of the great things about hosting the show every week here on the Better Sports Network from 7 to 9 is to pick the brains of some of the industry's best, yourself included. We have talked a lot about Jonathan Taylor over the course of the last 3-4 weeks on this show. Have not gotten your opinion on this. Now, Ian Rappaport tweeted out that Taylor is going to be away from the Colts on an excused absence. Shane Steichen, the head coach for the Colts today, said that he expects Taylor back, I believe, next week. I don't know what to read into this. This is one of those Dobbins things. It's one of those, issues where I'm not really sure if this is contract related, if it's an injury related, if it's a mixture. I don't know what to believe. What I do know is this: Taylor is falling in the Fantasy Pros Championship, his ADP. This is a player that was going as the 101 or the 102 last year, had a bad season because of injury. And now this year, because of the contract stuff, because of the ankle cleanup stuff, now we're seeing Jonathan Taylor fall to the 3rd round on average. Not even like I've seen him go in the 3rd round a couple of times. He's gone as late as the end of the 3rd round in the Fantasy Pros Championship over the last 3 days. On average, he is dipping into the 301, 302 area. Is this the time to pounce on Taylor, or do you think his value could even fall further? How are you handling Taylor in your drafts right now, my friend?
I think it completely depends on how aggressive you were being on Jonathan Taylor before. If you were buying in on Jonathan Taylor going, okay, well, this rushing quarterback, Anthony Richardson's going to be there. And quite often we see running backs become extra efficient when they are running behind a dual threat because it's harder for the defenses to defend. They're spread out more. They're trying to account for more things. If you were buying heavily onto Jonathan Taylor at that point, then you should absolutely be buying the dip. I think if you were nervous before, then this isn't a situation where you start going, okay, well, now I need to go all in on Jonathan Taylor because, last year he'd regressed massively from where he was in 2021. He went from being the RB2 in points per game in 2021 to RB19 last year. He between weeks 3 to 8 last year, he had 76 attempts and 0 touchdowns to show for it. And he was averaging 13 receiving yards per game. And yes, the Colts were a complete mess. The offensive line was a mess. Matt Ryan was a mess. But Jonathan Taylor wasn't able to create magic in the way that he was. The ankle injury seems to really be dragging on. That was something which, you read some of the reports around the Colts and people were surprised there was still even potentially an issue heading into training camp. So I think it's a combination of that and the contract. And I don't mind taking little dips on Jonathan Taylor now and again. And when he slips past his ADP, and if you can get Jonathan Taylor at the back end of the third round, then yeah, absolutely, I'll be taking that. But it's not an auto click for me. It's not the kind of one where I have complete confidence everything's going to get sorted out and that he's going to return to being the RB1 overall.
Excuse me. Given the history of running backs who are playing behind a running quarterback, does that knock Taylor down? Like, even like when you're talking about him in the mid or even late third round, does that knock Taylor down, understanding the fact that it's very, very difficult to have a very good running quarterback and a very, or I shouldn't say very good, a guy who has the talent to be a very good running back at quarterback and a talented rusher in the backfield. Those often don't mix too well. Does that knock Taylor down even to the point where you're like, okay, you know what? There's so many other guys I like here. I'm going to let him be somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to see Jonathan Taylor being a difference maker in the receiving game this year because we've got so much evidence that rushing quarterbacks they're not looking to check down because it's so much easier for them. The lane is open for them to just go and run instead and to pick up a similar amount to what they think they're going to get from checking it down. So when you tie all that together, it becomes increasingly difficult to make an argument in favor of Jonathan Taylor, apart from just going back to what we saw in 2021 when you're going, okay, well, he looked elite, truly elite that season, and he broke off so many big runs. But outside of that, I really struggle to make an argument for it. It's just a portfolio building exercise for me at this point in terms of if you're doing several hundred drafts, then it's very easy to do it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of pros versus Joes, fantasy championship or main event, those kind of ones, you've got a lot of cheese on the line and you're trying to decide what to do. And Jonathan Taylor, that's why he's slipping, because a lot of people just don't want the headache.
Yeah, and yeah, why would you? I mean, I'm fine with dealing with a 10th round headache or a 9th round headache. That's fine. But when you're talking about a guy with Taylor going in the third round, man, I see a lot more paths to misery than to success with that. That's just the way I view it. Now, here's another, maybe on the flip side of the coin, maybe not. I don't know how you feel about this. Pete Carroll said that Kenneth Walker, while he hasn't practiced since the first day of camp, they don't consider his injury serious. Brady Henderson tweeted this out. Now, it's Pete Carroll, right? So he's going to be always captain positive with everything regarding his players' injuries. What I've noticed in the Fantasy Pros Championship, Kenneth Walker was like almost a borderline first-round pick back in March and April. Almost. Normally going in the second round. Then the Charbonnet incident happened, and then he plummeted. Then Walker got hurt, and then he plummeted again. I am seeing a tiny bit of a bounce back right now. Kenneth Walker was going sometimes the late 5th, sometimes early 6th. He settled in. I don't want to say settled in because this is only like 3 or 4 days of data here, but he's basically being picked in the mid 5th round right now. He is the 17th running back off the board. You can get him as your second running back pretty comfortably right now. How do you view Kenneth Walker if you're drafting right now and you have to make a pick? Does he make sense for you in the mid 5th round?
I'm okay with Kenneth Walker in like hero RB builds. If I've got running back in the first round and then adding Kenneth Walker in round 5, before then adding another running back at sort of like round 8 to round 10 around that area, so that I'm leaving the first 10 rounds with 3 running backs. And that third running back needs to be one that I'm confident has a good role to start the season to make up for any time which Kenneth Walker misses or if he's slow out the gate. I think the big ding on Kenneth Walker this year is Zach Charbonnet. Last year when Walker was in Seattle, they didn't want him to be an every down running back from the get-go, but obviously Rashad Penny got injured. And last year, Walker, we know he's not an elite receiving running back. He's not out there running routes like CMC does and just, juking defenders out of their shoes. But he got 21% of his fantasy points from the receiving game last year. Like, that's not an insignificant amount. And if he's not going to get that, Charbonnet, is not a zero in the running game. He's a good runner. He's he was only drafted 11 slots behind where Kenneth Walker was drafted. It doesn't seem outlandish to suggest that by the end of the year, Charbonnet could have flipped this to be like 60-40 in his favor. But I do like Kenneth Walker more so in best ball format because we've seen him. He's such a boom bust player. He can rip off those big runs, but he can also give you 3 runs for 6 yards and stuff like that. So I'm more tempted by him in non-managed leagues like best ball than I am in managed rosters.
Yeah, it's weird to think of Kenneth Walker, a bruiser, right? A volume guy to be thinking about as more of a best ball pick. But you laid it out why that might be a smart play this year for fantasy players. One of the I don't think I'm being known for this yet, although it's been going on the last couple of years, basically ever since Josh Allen became an MVP candidate. Anytime I have an opportunity on this show, the HSFF Hour, the Road to Biz High Stakes Lowdown, and I bring on whether it's somebody in the industry like you, Tom, or somebody who's a high stakes player, accomplished high stakes player, I always ask them about the Bills running back situation, right? The Bills running back situation is fascinating to me, almost as fascinating as the Kansas City running back situation. And the Bills, they let Singletary go. Okay, wheels up for James Cook, not so fast. Damian Harris gets signed by the Bills this year. Elena Getzenberg, who covers the Bills for ESPN, said that Harris missed the practice on Wednesday to rest his knee. Again, I have not seen practice reports today. I don't know what he did. But let's just look at this here from the standpoint of the Bills running back situation. I am really surprised that James Cook, a guy who was drafted potentially just as a pass-catching running back, and now is being touted as potentially a 3-down guy on a team that is going to put up a lot of points, or at least should put up a lot of points this year. He is still wallowing in the early 7th round. 7th round for James Cook. Damian Harris has fallen to the early 11th round right now. Your thoughts on how you draft Bills running backs properly, whether you're a volume drafter, whether you're drafting just one team. Who's the better value here? Is it Cooks in the early 7th, or is it Damian Harris in the early 11th?
I was pretty aggressive on Damian Harris from the get-go as soon as drafts kind of opened up this season, and I'm currently sitting at 16% Damian Harris and only 4% James Cook, because when you look at what they had on paper, yes, James Cook profiles as that kind of exciting back who can break long runs and he can play in the passing game, but he doesn't fit for the goal line opportunities. And you know, he's only 190 pounds, whereas Damian Harris is 210 pounds. We've seen him be an absolute, really good goal line option. I think he was 14, 15 touchdowns that he scored a couple of seasons ago to only 3 last year as he struggled through injuries. So it just seemed all too easy to go, okay, well, after the Bills went out of the playoffs, they talked about how they want Josh Allen to take fewer hits. They felt very strongly that was what was a problem for Josh Allen down the stretch last year, that the injuries were starting to pile up on him from hits he'd taken running in short yardage. And you're never going to stop that completely. But it just was like, okay, well, they added Damian Harris and they said this, so it would make sense if Damian Harris is going to be the goal line back on a team that we expect to be very good. He's going to score plenty of touchdowns. So I was taking the cheaper option there in an ambiguous backfield, which is something which I quite often do. But now that Damian Harris doesn't seem to have as much daylight between him and Latavius Murray, who looked, for all intents and purposes, pretty good last season. He was out there averaging something like 15.6 touches per game in the games he played, and he was breaking longer runs. And yes, he's in his 30s, but if he's able to take some of the work from Damian Harris, then in that case, it kind of changes how I want to approach his backfield. And all of a sudden, I would much rather take the shots on James Cook when he slips past his ADP, not at or above his ADP. But if I can get a little bit of a bargain against the other drafters right now, then I'll take that, because it feels like James Cook's probably going to have the most fantasy production out of the 3 of them.
James Cook, too, by the way, you say, oh, bulky Tom, he's not slipping past his ADP. He actually is. Over the last 3 days in the FantasyPros Championship, he's gone as late as the end of the 7th round. So that's almost a full round of value that you can sometimes get on James Cook right now, which makes perfect sense. Las Vegas Raiders, we touched on Josh Jacobs earlier before we get to the running back report segment, which is going on right now. The Raiders have listed Zamir White as their top running back on their first unofficial depth chart because Josh Jacobs is not with the team right now. Again, this is according to Raiders.com. So twofold question here, Tom. And I know you're a volume drafter. You've drafted a ton of teams, especially for best ball. Josh Jacobs in the FantasyPros Championship, which again is a managed league, 20-round managed league. Josh Jacobs, 309 is his ADP. Zamir White has creeped up into the early 13th round right now as running back 52. I am an advocate of not drafting your stud running backs backup in a national tournament. In a closed 12-team league, I like to do it. But in a national tournament, I want to increase my variance. So for me, it's one or the other here. Is Jacobs a guy that you would be looking at in the late third? And then conversely, Zamir White, if you don't have Jacobs, when do you start looking at him, given that he's going off in the early 13th?
Yeah, so this was a situation that burned me last year. I had barely any Josh Jacobs last year. I kind of felt like, we'd seen enough of what he was. It felt like he was a plodder. He was, volume over really anything else. And I drafted too much Zamir White last season, and I definitely was on the wrong end of it. And, Zamir White went on to touch the ball 16 times for 66 yards in the whole of the season. And it didn't feel like Zamir White ever was doing anything to impress the Raiders. So I have a hard time now suddenly going, okay, well, if Josh Jacobs does hold out into the season, thinking that Zamir White is suddenly going to become good, or at least good enough to sustain this backfield to a point where they keep him out there for drives. I think if you want to take a dart throw, Amir Abdullah, who has been involved in the receiving game, he's somebody that I quite like, particularly if you're in one of these large field best ball tournaments. I think that there's some game theory to taking a guy who's drafted. Everybody's assuming it's going to be Abdullah gives you more usable weeks. What if towards the end of the season they shut Josh Jacobs down because he doesn't want to injure himself? And Amir Abdullah is out there getting receptions from a quarterback, Jimmy G, who we know likes to check down a lot. That feels like there's some value to it. In terms of Jacobs, I'm okay taking Jacobs. I feel better about the situation there, weirdly, than Jonathan Taylor, even though Josh Jacobs has more leverage because he is on the tag and he doesn't have to sign it. But it feels like there's a framework there in what Saquon Barkley did with the Giants, that the Raiders, they can shift $900,000 of money to make sure that Josh Jacobs signs and shows up. That feels like something that they'll work out, and in another week or two, he'll be in camp.
I want to ask you about Jerome Ford and how you're treating the Browns situation right now. I have been drafting Jerome Ford as an injury away type guy, right? Because it certainly seemed like he is the guy to have in Cleveland. No Kareem Hunt, no Dearness Johnson. And we heard the reports out of Cleveland that he's going to have an expanded role this year. He has a hamstring injury, which is not good. And he's week to week, not day to day on that, which is even worse. Scott Petrick on Twitter put this out there on X. Jerome Ford, are you still buying into him as an injury away type guy? Because when you look at Nick Chubb, if he were to go down, and this is his fifth year in the league, something like that. If he were to go down, Cleveland doesn't really have another good solution there. And Ford has shown out not only as a pass catcher, but a guy who can perhaps carry most of the load if need be. Your thoughts on Ford right now?
Yeah, it's such a shame for Jerome Ford because he seemed to have really gained the confidence of the front office and the coaching staff in Cleveland, and this looked to be the kind of opportunity that you really wanted for him. Last year, he had 8 touches, which he turned into 12 yards. Okay, that's fine. Just write it off. It was a rookie season, much like Zamir White. Okay, maybe we're not getting the full picture. But you go back to Jerome Ford's last season in college, and he rushed for 1,319 yards, scored 19 rushing touchdowns as well as 1 through the air. That is the kind of profile of a player that, he's been there, he's done it. There's tape of him being able to do it. And yeah, like you say, Nick Chubb has been an incredibly reliable running back. Over the last 3 seasons, he's averaged, I think, something like at least 87 yards per game in the rushing game. So it just feels like there are so many free agent running backs out there at the minute that the Browns could easily add someone if they feel like this is something they need. I think you look at their cap situation, they're not incredibly flush, but these running backs who are out there, they have zero leverage. Kareem Hunt visited the Colts after visiting the Saints. Would it make some sense to get him back? It feels like that relationship was a little difficult towards the end, but maybe it'd just be the best for both involved because this Browns front office and coaching staff, they absolutely have to win games this year.
And with all that money that they soaked into Watson, you don't have the whole, he's been missing for a year and a half. Let's give him a break. He's got to knock off the rust. It's time to go. And I'm actually buying into the Browns offense this year. Cooper and Moore and Peoples-Jones and Njoku, Watson. I like all those guys for sure. Final point I want to bring up on the running back report here. Head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Todd Bowles, called Chase Edmonds a jack of all trades in training camp. Now, Edmonds is probably going to be backing up Rachaad White, this according to Jenna Lane from ESPN. They still have Keyshawn Vaughn there. As I look at the ADP right now for Chase Edmonds in the FantasyPros Championship, where you can win $1 million at myffpc.com. Running back 73 as the 1805. I still think, and let's open this up to the Rachaad White discussion as well. I still think Rachaad White is being underdrafted by FFPC high stakes players, a guy who is going that you can still get in the mid 6th round, as I alluded to earlier in our Buccaneers discussion. But what about Chase Edmonds in the middle of the 18th? Because Edmonds, the other thing that he does well is he can catch passes here, Tom. Your take on how to handle the Buccaneers, be it in the Fantasy Pros Championship or best ball drafts.
It's a really tricky situation because I think what Chase Edmonds does well, as you talked about, is he catches balls well. You know, he was 20th in receiving EPA amongst all running backs last year, but Rachaad White was 11th in receiving EPA. So it's an area which Rachaad White's really good at. What Rachaad White struggled with last year was being a good runner. He was incredibly inefficient. He ranked 140th in expected points added, 51st in juke rate amongst running backs with 50 or more attempts. So what the Bucs kind of really need is a player, somebody like a Gus Edwards who can really add to the running game. But what they've got is they've got two guys who are actually really good at catching the ball. And I'm not sure what it is that Chase Edmonds does well, but is going to see him get onto the field ahead of Rachaad White, who is a player that I kind of eased back on my drafting for a couple of weeks during July and sort of reassessed and looked at where the portfolio was. And it's like, okay, well, Rachaad White's a player who he's in the area of drafts where we've seen league winners come from, whether you're talking about Leonard Fournette, James Conner over the last few years, Josh Jacobs, that sort of round 7 to 10 area. We quite often see players come out of there and perform really well and above expectations at an area where wide receiver starts to just dry up a little bit. So I want to be taking shots at running backs in that range, and I've definitely been adding more Rachaad White in the last few days than I had before.
Yeah, I think that's a smart play. I think that's the way to do it, too. That concludes tonight's running back report here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. We have so much more to get to tonight, including a special Where Do You Stand on segment. Tom Strachan, a noted Baltimore Ravens fan, is going to weigh in on a couple of Ravens. Lamar Jackson, he's going to weigh in on Rashad Bateman. Where does he stand on these guys? You might be surprised, or maybe not. I don't know. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. Hour 2 starts right after this.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Eric Balkman.
What can we expect for you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing, but I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Come on!
Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire, over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool. The champ is here. Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush. You were doing the Instagram live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're gonna win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's gonna beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no!
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations. And no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
If you like playing fantasy football every single day of the year, and quite frankly, why wouldn't you if you're watching this show? Register for Dynasty Startup Drafts now at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. $100 will get you in if you want to play for a little higher stakes than that. They go all the way up to the $5,000 level. We've been doing Dynasty nearly a decade, actually over a decade here with the FFPC. More than 1,400 plus leagues. Not a single one of them has ever folded. You don't have to worry about shady commissioners, bad trades, whatever. We take care of all that at myffpc.com. Tom Strachan from Football Outsiders, Fantasy Pros, and the Fantasy Football Sanctuary joining us tonight, wearing a stunning Houston Oilers baseball cap tonight. That is gorgeous. I always, I was a big fan back in the day, Tom, of Warren Moon. He used to be like one of my favorite players when I was growing up. I love Warren Moon. I always thought those colors were sharp. Now, I know you're a Ravens fan. How did you hop into this Oilers hat here?
I mean, it's just retro. Being a Ravens fan, there's not much retro gear for the Ravens. And
Sure.
Any stuff like that, I'm a sucker for all the kind of retro stuff. And I can't bring myself to buy too much stuff from other teams. I've got the odd bit which hangs on the wall and stuff. But yeah, the Oilers, it was like, well, that's easy because we're, no longer around.
Perfect. Yes, it works out. Let me ask you this. For the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, now you co-host that. How often are you guys producing content on that YouTube channel? Because I know, as you said earlier, that the content level of volume has gone up exponentially quite a bit recently.
Yeah, we launched in January, and since then we've had 300 videos go up on the channel. Myself and Rich Cooling, who writes for DLF and is a fantastic Dynasty expert, really covers that side of things really well. I cover best ball, DFS side of it, and we kind of take redraft together. But yeah, at the minute, we're aiming to bring out at least one video per day between now and the time that the season starts. We've got loads of redraft, quick, short form content that's like 20 minutes long, 2 best ball streams a week. Rich has got his Dynasty stuff going as well. So yeah, we're really pleased with how it's going and how it's being received.
It is the season, right, to crank out content because we all can't get enough of it, myself included. All right. Let's get into a special segment we like to call Where Do You Stand On? And when we go through this segment, it's going to be players that sometimes are polarizing, Tom, sometimes not so polarizing. Sometimes I just pick out players that I think aren't being talked about enough, and I want to know where you stand on them. And I'm going to lead things off here with a guy we kind of teased a little bit earlier in the Seattle backfield, and that's the rookie Zach Charbonnet out of UCLA by way of the University of Michigan. Charbonnet, running back 36 on average at the 905. He's going in the mid-9th round. At that value, Tom Strachan, where do you stand on Zach Charbonnet?
Yeah, I've been drafting plenty of Zach Charbonnet. I think when it comes to ambiguous backfields, I want to buy the cheaper option because it just feels so much easier to make that bet. And Charbonnet, he can play both in the run and the pass. He put up good numbers with the Bruins last year, 1,350 yards on the ground, 320 through the air. And Pete Carroll talked immediately after the draft about wanting to get him involved in the screen game. And that's something which the Seahawks haven't done over the last few years, but they've had an offensive coordinator change, and it really feels like that's a shift which Pete Carroll is being very deliberate about, and he wants to do it. Mentioned earlier that Charbonnet was drafted only 11 spots after Kenneth Walker was the year before. Like, that's not a big, significant amount of draft capital difference. I really do think that, if it's through injury or whether it's just through better performance, that Zach Charbonnet could be having a very meaningful role when it comes to the fantasy playoffs.
And I think that's the thing. I mentioned this earlier. This is the thing to remember. As important as the regular season is, we still want to make sure you're drafting the right people to be going off for you in the fantasy postseason, in that sprint at the end, or week 17, as it were. When you think about getting a leg up on your competition, if you're watching this, you probably already have one. So you want to draft the guys because you believe that you're going to be there at the end, which always, isn't always the easiest thing to do. But if you want to believe that you're going to be there in the end, you got to look ahead. And Charbonnet is a good look ahead pick this year. Now, I'm not going to reveal how I feel about this next player, but he has been 1B to Aaron Jones in Green Bay the last few years. His name is A.J. Dillon. He is running back 34 at the 902 right now. This is Brian Robinson, Rashad Penny, Zach Charbonnet territory. My feeling here is that if you have been drafting a lot of Charbonnet, Tom, you probably are not drafting a lot of A.J. Dillon, but I'm going to ask you anyway. A.J. Dillon, 902 ADP, where do you stand on him?
Yeah, I struggle a bit more with A.J. Dillon. I mean, I think the one thing you can say about A.J. Dillon is that he's been a consistent force there, and not too many running backs, like in terms of consistency, managed to stay healthy. But you look back over the last 2 seasons, and there were only 2 running backs who averaged 40% of the team's snaps, along with 16 plus games in each of the last 2 seasons. It's A.J. Dillon and Najee Harris. And if you're looking for a running back who's not going to give you a 0, I think that's definitely the case. He scored 7 touchdowns in back-to-back seasons, which, again, it's not to be sniffed at. Over the last 3 seasons, he's averaged between 0.8 and 0.9 PPR points per touch. He's been very consistent like that. But last year, between weeks 2 and 11, he averaged 6.1 PPR points per game, and he didn't have a single double-digit performance. He kind of rescued that by coming on really strong down the stretch and having those games that really made a difference. But I think it's easier for me to buy in on Aaron Jones and what he does this year than A.J. Dillon, because I think the range of outcomes for A.J. Dillon, there's a lot more of them that end up in the bad area, really, than
the water closet, as it were, right?
Yeah, we'll take that. Yeah. So I definitely, I don't dislike A.J. Dillon, and I think he's somebody that I'll probably draft a little bit more of over the next couple of weeks if Zach Charbonnet's price does rise and I kind of ease off him as it is.
So I live probably about, I always like to say, 2 Jordan Love Hail Marys southwest of Green Bay. So I'm in the thick of it here in Packers country. I have another gig where I have my own sports talk radio show here in Northeast Wisconsin. Obviously, the Packers are a huge part of that. A.J. Dillon has been beloved by Packers fans here. Dude just wrote a kid's book. He just became a father. He got married at Door County, which is sort of a resort area just north of Green Bay. People call him the mayor of Door County because he likes to hang out with the fans at all the bars and the establishments up there. Mentions him all the time. There is nobody that is more well-liked than A.J. Dillon. That said, I don't like A.J. Dillon for fantasy. Like, here's the thing. I have been such an Aaron Jones stan over the last several years because I still think that even this year, I think he is underdrafted once again. I keep getting all these shares of Aaron Jones, and I keep not regretting it. I mean, he set career highs last year in receiving. And the fact that you could still, again, I know it's Jordan Love and it's not Aaron Rodgers this year, but maybe that actually works in Aaron Jones' favor. There's a non-zero chance of that. Aaron Jones is going at the 409. He is the 16th running back off the board. You could go zero, well, not technically zero RB, but you could avoid running back in the first 3 rounds and get this dude as your number 1 running back. He's going to catch a lot of passes. They still work in between the tackles. He doesn't have the body for it. He has never had the body for it, and yet he continues to do it over the course of his career. I'm buying into Aaron Jones at this point, ladies and gentlemen. He's going to get it done again this year. The problem with A.J. Dillon is that I think he's more of a one-dimensional back. I don't believe that he's ever going to develop into be a 3-down banger. I think the Packers let him go to free agency this offseason. I don't believe they re-sign him. And I think as you kind of alluded to, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but he has been very touchdown dependent as far as fantasy purposes go the last couple of years. Those, while he has been consistent, those still are fluky numbers. And when you consider A.J. Dillon's ADP right now, which I already cited, going in the Charbonnet area in the early 9th round, I'd rather have Charbonnet. I'd rather have Rashad Penny, a guy that I could make all the same arguments about that I made with Dillon, but Penny is on a much more explosive offense there. Samaje Perine, Devin Achane, Khalil Herbert, who you talked about earlier. I think all these guys offer more upside than A.J. Dillon, and they're all going at least a half round, sometimes to a full round later on them. I could never say this on the air in Northeast Wisconsin. This is so therapeutic and cathartic for me to get this out tonight. I won't be drafting A.J. Dillon anywhere. I don't have any of my dynasty teams, and I'm going to sleep well knowing that I will not have him. Now, you said if Charbonnet ends up, his ADP goes up, you might be looking at Dillon a little bit more. And while I don't necessarily say I won't be doing that, man, I don't see it. Like, I'm looking for league winners at that point in the draft, and he's not one of them.
I think I agree with so much of what you said. I mean, like, his yards per carry, missed tackles force percentage, rushing EPA, and fantasy points per touch all hit career lows last year, whilst Aaron Jones stayed consistent, and Aaron Jones has been nothing but consistent. I think for me, one point which kind of draws me back to him is the whole Week 17 correlation thing. If you're playing in one of these massive tournaments with a huge final, they play Minnesota in Week 17, and it just feels like, okay, they could be in a situation where they're going to have to score points, and do those points come through A.J. Dillon? I think it's more likely they come through Aaron Jones. But if I'm if I'm drafting from the 101 and I've got Justin Jefferson, do I just sprinkle in a few teams with A.J. Dillon? I'm not against it completely.
Let's get to somebody I don't think you're against completely at all. That's Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman, wide receiver 51 at the 10-12. Now, these three guys, I've mentioned this on the show before, the three guys in Baltimore, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and Odell Beckham, a month and a half or so ago, they were tightly bunched, right? I mean, they were pretty much going all at the same spot. There has been some differentiation here. There's been more clarity. Zay Flowers has separated himself. He is now going in the late 8th round. Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham have plummeted. Well, plummeted is too strong of a word, but they've fallen. Bateman is now a late 10th round pick. Odell Beckham is an early 11th round pick. I want to talk about Bateman here, the guy who was on the PUP. He's no longer on the preseason PUP. He's practicing. Tom Strachan, noted Ravens fan. Where do you stand on one Rashad Bateman at the end of the 10th round?
Rashad Bateman's my highest exposed player that I've got this year. But what I would say is that this was always the plan with the Ravens and Bateman. You go back to sort of even around the draft, and they were talking that they weren't going to rush Bateman back. They've seen what happens when you rush players back over the last couple of years and how bad it can be for what goes on in season. So they were always going to take it easy. They were fine knowing that as long as he got on the field in training camp after a couple of weeks, that he'd have enough time to ramp up before the season. And you look at what he was doing in training yesterday, and he's moving so fast. He's not walking gingerly or anything. And you go back and look at OTAs, and he was. So for me, my plan was always that I was going to load up on Rashad Bateman now before the price rose. And already I've been in slow drafts over the last 24 hours where I'm seeing him go 2 rounds ahead of his ADP, right back to where it was a month ago before he got put on the PUP. And it's like, that's not the way I want to get exposure to any player. I think what Bateman does so well is we saw it in a limited amount last year, but Lamar wanted to target him downfield. He had 7 deep targets in a matter of like a few games before he was lost for the season. And it feels like that's what the Ravens need. Zay Flowers is going to win near the line of scrimmage. He's going to win in areas of the field which Lamar's good at throwing to. Mark Andrews is going to do that. But if Bateman can play the field stretcher as well as playing near the line of scrimmage occasionally, then I'm all about that. I think that this is going to be a very explosive offense under Todd Monken, and wheels up.
We're talking with Tom Strachan here from FantasyPros, the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, and of course, Football Outsiders, talking where do you stand on certain players here. And this one caught me off guard. I was stalking your X or your Twitter, whatever you want to call it, Twitter or X if you're nasty, as I always say. Van Jefferson. maybe it's because I spent so much time on this show talking with guys like Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros, who is a big Puka Nacua fan, and other people that were Nacua fans, and other people who like some other Rams pass catchers this year. Even in the wake of the Cup injury, they were turning on to Tyler Higbee. You like Van Jefferson. Now, Van Jefferson he's not free, but you can get him pretty cheap. Wide receiver 67 in the mid-15th round of the Fantasy Pros Championship, a player that we have seen steamed up before in drafts, and a player who is playing, we think, on a bad team that has, and I use this term a little bit lightly here, a Hall of Fame quarterback throwing to him. I feel like the quarterback is competent enough to get the ball to Jefferson, and the defense is bad enough to make Jefferson worthwhile here. Is that the way you see Jefferson in the mid-15th round? Tom Strachan, where do you stand on Van Jefferson?
Yeah, and I'll just caveat it by saying this is best ball only in managed leagues. I'm not sure it's going to be ever easy to start Van Jefferson, but according to Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, he's the clear wide receiver to behind Cooper Kupp. I think, possibly in terms of team target share, we might see him end up being the third target on the team when all is said and done. But yeah, the Rams defense looks awful. There's no real competition behind Cooper Kupp. Van Jefferson is going to be out there. They were talking him up last offseason when he got hurt to start the season, but he still ended up being productive down the stretch last year. He was a top 36 wide receiver in 40% of his appearances, and that was in games where Baker Mayfield and John Wolford were throwing the ball to him. So he did as well as could be hoped for last year. And if you're telling me that he can turn in another 5 top 36 wide receiver performances this year, I'd buy that all day for where you can get him. And I think I'm a big proponent of stacking. I think you look at where his ADP goes, it's very easy to add him or Tyler Higbee to a Matthew Stafford stack later on if you're finding yourself without a stack at that point in the draft. And yeah, it's not a player that I'm going to be massively aggressive on, but I think we have a clear defined role for him. And unlike Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, he just kind of fits an okay profile, which I'm fine with, whereas they're more outliers in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense too. And like Jefferson is a guy that I have drafted late in previous seasons, and and not that I've been taking Nacua this season, but I think I have to start taking a long, hard look at, when I like to have my receiver positions filled by the 15th round because I don't see a whole lot of value after that. Again, I'm talking about a managed leagues, not in best ball. Best ball would make more sense too. But I think, and that's what your argument here is with Jefferson. I'm going to have to take a long, hard look there. And I think Jefferson could make some sense there. Even though you don't think of him as the prototypical spike week player, I think he still could have some this year as well. We are talking with Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros. I want to, how do I talk about this? I'll bring this up the way I normally do, I guess. Kyle Pitts has been polarizing ever since even before he was drafted, quite frankly. He was polarizing in FFPC Dynasty rookie leagues. He was polarizing in the FFPC main event that first year. He was polarizing in FFPC leagues last year, and he's polarizing again this year in the Fantasy Pros Championship. We've seen guys have issues. We've seen people have issues like, where do I draft this guy? Because I see that the sky is the limit for him. He's got this incredibly high ceiling. But I also see the potential for downfall. Last year, the downfall was injury. This year, you're still dealing with Arthur Smith there, which I think is kind of a wild card as far as a head coach. And you have a talented wide receiver in Drake London and a super talented running back in Bijan Robinson that could be taking away targets from Kyle Pitts. Now, this year, and this is always the equalizer. Okay, Balky, well, where is he going in FFPC drafts? Right now, Kyle Pitts is being drafted as the tight end 6, Tom Strachan, in the early 5th round. He is behind Waller and Kittle. He is ahead of Dallas Goedert, but only slightly. Where do you stand on Atlanta tight end Kyle Pitts?
So last year, we were sat here a year after Trevor Lawrence had been hyped up and came into the league and then had extenuating circumstances where Urban Meyer basically ruined his rookie season. And then last offseason, everyone was down on Trevor Lawrence, forgetting what a kind of a prospect he was. And then he goes out and lights it up. And I feel like that's entirely possible for Kyle Pitts. He had one of the best rookie seasons as a tight end that we've seen in the last 2 decades. In terms of fantasy, yes, he only scored, 1 touchdown in the London game. He didn't score a single touchdown for the rest of the year until the Pro Bowl. But he was getting the yardage, he was getting the receptions. Then last year, he had a really strange season. He was second in target share among tight ends last year, but he was 47th in catchable ball rate among tight ends. So the ball was coming his way, but it was just impossible for him to catch it because Marcus Mariota was so trash. And you look at how Kyle Pitts scored, got his receptions and got his targets. He led the position in air yards per game with 81.6, despite only seeing 5.9 targets per game. So that's telling you that he was seeing the ball being targeted downfield. He was seeing those big, big passes, which is giving him that sort of 81.6 air yards per game. Now, yes, Desmond Ridder is going to be quarterback, but if the Falcons keep targeting him downfield, there aren't too many tight ends who really see those kind of deep downfield shots like that. And that's something which really can just be explosive for the position. You look at Dallas Goedert, and so much of Dallas Goedert's fantasy production comes on screen passes because they use him so heavily there. I would take Kyle Pitts and the sort of 40, 50-yard passes all day over him. But it is very much being aware of the fact that Desmond Ridder could also just be a complete mess this year, and it could go very badly.
It could, and that's why Kyle Pitts is so compelling. I want to make Kyle Pitts the guy that is going to be the most polarizing player in FFPC tight end premium drafts every single year of his career. I think that would be what a hook to hang your hat on, right? With Kyle Pitts this year, we'll see what happens with that. But I think you bring up a lot of good points there in regards to how you handle him in FantasyPros championship drafts. All right, I want to, against my better judgment, I'm going to go back to the well here and ask you about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, I think we talked about this at the top of the show in regards to Joe Burrow, that Jackson was behind Burrow, then coupled, with Jackson's contract being resolved, and then Burrow's injury, Jackson has moved ahead of Joe Burrow right now. He is being drafted as the fourth quarterback. Hard for me to believe he's going to get up to QB3 to surpass Josh Allen. He would have to move up basically 3/4 of a round to do it, and I don't see that happening. I also don't necessarily see Herbert or Burrow catching him anymore. So I think he's pretty comfortably going to be drafted as an early, maybe a mid-4th round pick in the FFPC main event, the FantasyPros Championship, as the fourth quarterback off the board. How do you stand, or where do you stand, I should say, Tom Strachan? Where do you stand on Lamar Jackson this year?
All the chips are in. I mean, you look at what Lamar Jackson's got now. In his MVP campaign, he was throwing the ball to Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown, and then it was Willie Snead, John Brown, Seth Roberts. Now he's got Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman, who's healthy, as we've said, Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely. That is so much better. But he's also got a new offensive coordinator. And the key with the new offensive coordinator in Todd Monken is that John Harbaugh talked frequently after he'd hired Todd Monken about how it was important to find somebody who could play at a higher pace. Greg Roman would get to the line of scrimmage and the plays would come in so slowly and they'd be so long. The verbiage on them took forever to regurgitate. The Ravens, I think they were 3rd in pre-snap penalties last year. And now Todd Monken is somebody who loves playing fast, loves playing at tempo. He loves to use the screen game. The screen game is something that's never been there for the Ravens. So much so that when the Ravens are playing, if they ever ran a screen pass, every Ravens beat reporter would just have to tweet about it because it was such an unusual event. So now if you're saying that, okay, he's going to give Lamar layup throws as well as unlocking the passing game so that wide receivers aren't running into each other, then that should be exponentially better. And then also, I think some people look back at what Lamar did last year and they go, okay, well, he only got 20.3 points per game. But if you remove a game where he left because of injury after playing 13% of the snaps, then it jumps to 21.98. That's a 10% rise pretty much at the quarterback position. That is not insignificant. And I think it's fair for him to be that QB4. It seems like where he's settled is fine. I mean, as a Ravens fan, if he climbed higher, I'd be drafting him still. But yeah, I think when you look at the quarterback position as a whole, the top 3 are very difficult for me to draft because of the opportunity cost of doing so. But Lamar, the Justins, and, And then even down to Trevor Lawrence, that's a tier where I want lots of those quarterbacks as often as possible.
You know, you are the expert on the Ravens on this show. Can you offer our viewers any insight into, and if there's no player here, Tom, that's fine. Just let us know. Is there a player that's either being criminally underdrafted or egregiously overdrafted as a member of the Ravens this year that you just don't see you don't see the outcome that FFPC players are seeing with how these players are treated in fantasy? Is there somebody that we should be looking to fade or target here?
Well, Gus Edwards, he's not going to be a nothing this year. The gap between J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards doesn't make sense. You look at between where you can take J.K. Dobbins and where you can take Gus Edwards, there's 3 members of the Bears backfield who are all being drafted in that range. There's Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard, stuff like that. There's all these backfields where you've got multiple members, but Gus Edwards is being written off probably because he isn't a player who's ever going to give you like pure the nut ceiling outcomes. I think, even if J.K. Dobbins doesn't play, what is the ceiling for Gus Edwards? But if you're looking for a guy who's going to pick up 5 yards per carry as he's averaged throughout his career and look to be a touchdown threat, then that's Gus Edwards. And yeah, I think he's definitely undervalued. Aside from that, if you're in the deeper leagues, like the 28 round drafts, someone like Nelson Aguilar has consistently been playing well during camp. The beat reporters all think he's possibly surpassed Devin Duvernay as the wide receiver 4 in that offense. And if you're looking for just to backdoor your way into a slight stack, if you've missed out on some of the more prominent targets, then Nelson Aguilar's been paid enough that he's going to be on the roster. He's going to be out there at times, and he could have his opportunities.
And that, if you had Aguilar on your bingo card tonight on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, congratulations. I didn't see it coming, but you never know what's going to come with Tom Strachan here from Fantasy Pros, the Fantasy Football Sanctuary, and of course, Football Outsiders. Let's step out, take our final break tonight. When we come back, we've been talking about the FFPC Pros versus Joe's drafts. The Better Sports Network's been re-airing all our coverage on it, so it's such a fascinating thing. We're going to get into it in a little bit. Tom Strachan are you still drafting in that draft right now?
No, it's all done now.
All done. Okay, perfect. So we'll be able to analyze your draft. I have a few picks I want to center on and find out what you were thinking when you made those picks. Not necessarily bad, but I want to get into your mind when we get into it, and find out if you believe that you're going to be drafting for free in the 2024 FFPC main event. Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. That's me. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network rolls on right after this.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy, I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think that's taking a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, and the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted 2 themselves with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as the best ball, like end of best ball? Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Ingram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Minutes remain in tonight's broadcast before we get over to Garrett Price and his merry band of Dynasty nerds at the top of the hour. That's what's going on here in the Better Sports Network currently. You are watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and I'm talking with Tom Strachan from FantasyPros, Football Outsiders, and of course the Fantasy Football Sanctuary as well. Hanging out tonight, we've gotten into a lot, Tom. We've gotten into the latest around training camps. We've talked about the running back report. I think we've analyzed that pretty well. We found out where you stood on a lot of players. And now I think there's nothing left to do, basically, but analyze your fantasy football players championship, pros versus Joe's draft. Now, was this your first year in it, or had you been in it before? I forget.
Yeah, this is my first year. Really appreciated Darren Armani asking me to be part of it. It's it's such a prestigious draft, and there's so many incredibly smart people, not just the analysts, but the people who end up in there as well. It was definitely great fun to be a part of.
And I'm glad you were. Now you were in. We covered all 6 of the live drafts on the HSFF hour, and obviously, if you're watching the BSN, you're going to be able to see a lot of them re-aired here. We did not get a chance to cover your slow draft, and I always like to talk a little bit about the slow draft because it doesn't get the exposure that it does. Now, you had the second pick. You were drafting between, let's see here. You're drafting right behind Jeff Howell, who I've talked to before, a long-time accomplished FFPC player. You take Justin Jefferson at the 102. Okay, no surprise there. I totally get it. Chris Olave comes back to you. That's on par with ADP. Get that there. So you start off your draft with a couple of running backs. Now, I'm going to the ADP I'm going to utilize for this is basically I don't want to say a mirror image, but the best ball tournament that we have going on at myffpc.com, $125 to enter a $200,000 grand prize. That's the closest ADP we have to the pros versus Joes. Normally in that draft, Breece Hall is going at the end of the third round. You took him early here tonight, not tonight, but you took him early in the slow draft at the 302 as your number 1 running back. There are other running backs out there: Jacobs, Stevenson, Gibbs, plenty others. We even looked to the 4th round. ETN and Harris were still out there. Can you talk a little bit about why you like Breece Hall at that pick at the 302?
I think, this was pre the Dalvin Cook visit. Mm-hmm. So basically, I think I had about a day after I took Breece Hall, the Dalvin Cook visit came, and then his ADP started to slip a bit. So it definitely didn't feel great at the time. Now I kind of feel fine about it. It feels like if the Jets were going to add someone, they would have. But we saw Breece Hall just looked like an absolute monster last year. He was so good. He was everything that the Dynasty community had been hyping him up to be for years. And when he came in as a prospect, he was fantastic. He took over that role very quickly. And when I think about Breece Hall, I just think about Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones. And I just think that is exactly what we're going to see. I think we're going to see him be truly dominant down the stretch. I haven't taken huge amounts of Breece Hall this year. I'm kind of like at about average 8%. I haven't taken any Javonte Williams this year because I'm kind of, I got burned by J.K. Dobbins last year on players coming back from ACL. So I've not been aggressive. But all the people who know better than me when it comes to sports science are suggesting that Breece Hall's ACL was a very clean tear. Mm-hmm. He can recover from it a lot easier than Javonte Williams or J.K. Dobbins. And I just felt being at the 3-2, Justin Jefferson fell into my lap. I expected that he would have gone 101, and I was probably going to take Travis Kelce at the 102. Chris Olave was another player who I definitely very much liked. It was between him and Devonta Smith for me, and I just edged towards Chris Olave. But then Breece Hall, these running back rooms on FFPC can be, the drafts can be a lot more running back heavy than on a lot of other platforms. And I'm very comfortable with a lot of different strategies.
but I was also aware that it sitting here at 3-2, if I had no running back, by the time it came back to me, I could have been looking at somebody like Aaron Jones, Alexander Mattison to be my running back one. That wasn't something which I particularly wanted.
When you moved on from the Breece Hall pick in the 3rd round, I'm not going to move any further than the 4th round here. And I think we can lump this in with your 5th round pick. At the 411, you take DJ Moore, and then you grab Justin Fields at the 502. The quarrel, and not necessarily a quarrel here, the issue that I look at here with the DJ Moore pick, he was going on average at the 509, so you're drafting him not quite, but almost a full round ahead of ADP. You get Justin Fields a little bit before ADP, but I think the Moore pick makes sense there that you pair Fields with him. Again, first place gets a free entry into the main event in 2024. Second place gets not even a pair of socks. Like, you get nothing for second. Like, it is all about getting first place here. Can you talk a little bit about the DJ Moore pick here at the end of the 4th round?
Yeah, so basically, I wasn't too stressed about the ADP in this tournament because it's so much more condensed than a normal best ball tournament. In a normal best ball tournament, it's not something I would have done. I don't think what I perceive DJ Moore's ceiling to be and stuff to be that great above it. But when you look at the wide receivers that I perhaps took DJ Moore ahead of, DeAndre Hopkins, who, is with the Titans, who could be a complete mess. Drake London, who the Falcons, yes, Desmond Ridder could be a mess. And Chris Godwin with Baker Mayfield, it could be a mess. I kind of view it all as a bit of a tier. And DJ Moore, I felt confident that if I took DJ Moore there, I was going to get Justin Fields on the way back around in the 5th round. And it's not something which I've done a lot of, but I don't mind just taking a shot in a tournament like this where I am swinging for the fence and I want those ceiling outcomes. Like, if this is where the magic happens and I don't have a lot of exposure to this stack across my best ball exposure, like, that's fine. This is one of those kind of prestigious tournaments that if I win this and I've got a place in the main event next year, that'll make up for being wrong elsewhere.
Right. Yes, that's true. It will. It 100% will. Fast forward to round 6 here. At this point in your draft, in the first 5 rounds, you had 3 receivers. You had Breece Hall. You had Justin Fields. In the first segment tonight, we talked a very little bit about DK Metcalf, and you said how you were higher on Jackson Smith-Njigba, and you proved it right here with the JSN pick. You take Jackson Smith-Njigba tonight not tonight, but in this draft, you take him at the 6'11", right? And Smith-Njigba normally go, oh no, that's right on par, 6'11". I don't know what I was thinking here, but I guess maybe I wanted to bring it up with you because I wanted to figure out why you like Smith-Njigba, a guy that you took just 5 picks after Tyler Lockett went. What do you like about the rookie in Seattle this year?
So the Seahawks went out. They knew they needed a slot receiver. You go back and look at who they played out of the slot last year, and it was players like Marquise Goodwin. It was just like, I think even Laquan Treadwell at one point was the leader in a game for players playing out of the slot. They knew they needed somebody. Jackson Smith-Njigba's elite. He's an elite target earner. He outproduced Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave the last time he was healthy in college. And the Seahawks don't have that. Shane Waldron, who's the offensive coordinator, he came across from the Rams, and he'd been there when Cooper Kupp was breaking out. Like, he saw what having an elite slot receiver can do. And everybody talks, okay, well, the Seahawks prefer to play with 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends. But they didn't have that option last year. They didn't have the player who can be out there and win in the area of the field, which Geno Smith's really good at targeting. I think in full PPR, I really like that bet. I think it's going to become a pure volume play down the back, sort of like 9 of the fantasy season. I think he's going to eat into Tyler Lockett's production. I think he's going to eat into DK Metcalf's production. And I think he's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 out of rookies when all's said and done.
And you could be right on that. I remember because they all went bang, 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 bang in that first round of the NFL draft. I was hosting an NFL draft party for my radio station locally. I'm like, God, all these guys just went right in a row tonight. It's so weird to see. But that's the way it happened. And Smith-Njigba, obviously coupled with Lockett and Metcalf and obviously Charbonnet, a pass catcher. Man, I kind of like Geno Smith. I've been waiting on him too long, Tom, in drafts this year because I think Geno Smith is in for another good year given the players around him.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's being undervalued. I think
for people like me who dabble in the efficiency metrics, he was such a smash hit last year, and it's very easy to go, okay, well, we haven't seen him do it for a prolonged period of time, so maybe he's going to fall back to what he is. But in the point of the 2021 campaign, when he was covering for Russell Wilson, who was out for a few games injured, he was pretty similar to this as well. Like, most of his advanced stats were very similar to what he did last year. So we've seen enough now, but we should be able to count on it.
In my on-air and off-air life, I really hesitate to use the word hate, so I will not use it here. But I will say this. I have a love, strong dislike relationship with Samaje Perine this year. Perine was a guy last year, Tom, that I picked up in a lot of my dynasty leagues as the injury away type guy behind Mixon, and I never cut him. I still have him on a lot of these teams. And obviously when Denver signed him, quite frankly, early in free agency, I'm like, okay, we might have some with Perine because Williams shredded his knee last year. There's no way he's going to be ready in time for the start of the season. And then we get the news reports, whatever it was 3-4 weeks ago, that Williams is going to start practicing right away when training camp starts, and he's going to play in preseason games. I would have lost that bet every single time last year if you told me that Javonte Williams was going to be playing in preseason games in 2023, and yet here we are. He is going to do it. Perine, as a result, has fallen a little bit. Perine, you get him tonight. I keep saying tonight as if this draft's going on. Perine, you get him at the 902 in this Pros versus Joe's slow draft. And I got to tell you, I still think there's some value there, even with Williams. And maybe you're not sold on Williams' ACL repair or Williams, not his repair, but how well he comes back from it and how well he performs. And maybe there is some fantasy goodness with Perine here at the 902.
Yeah, definitely. And Stefania Bell of ESPN said it, I think it was last week, she was talking about there's a big difference between being back out there and playing how you did before the injury, and it's going to take a lot for him to get back there. And I mean, I just can't fathom why Sean Payton wants to play him in the preseason either. J.K. Dobbins, he had his injury in a preseason game. This is not like it's crazy to me. But when you look at Perine, he had an identical offer from the Bengals to go there and go back this season, but he chose to go to the Broncos because Sean Payton personally pitched him on how he likes to use two running backs and how productive he's had two running backs be over the last few years. Then you look back at what Perine did last year. He had 4.2 yards per carry to Joe Mixon's 4.0. He had 26 missed tackles to Joe Mixon's 33, but on 110 fewer attempts. He also outproduced Mixon in yards per reception with 7.6 to 7.3. He's shown that he can play in all areas of the game. And I think if Javonte Williams is slow to start the season, then Samaje Perine can get out to a good start. And I particularly like pairing him with Breece Hall, because if Breece Hall is slow to start the season, if he misses a bit of time, then Samaje Perine is somebody that I've paired consistently this season with players like Alvin Kamara, with Breece Hall, not with Javonte Williams, because I don't want that running back duo on a best ball team. But yeah, just looking at a little bit of game theory like that and to give myself a way out on those first few weeks.
How do you fall in on the Denver? Because I'm kind of buying on the Denver bounce back this season and the offense in general, because they can't be as bad as they were last year, Tom. They just cannot be. So I like Russell Wilson for a bounce back. I think Sutton, we're getting a lot of glowing reports about Sutton. And what's interesting about Sutton is even with all this positive hype about Cortland Sutton, everybody's still, not everybody, but the large plurality seems to say that Jeudy is the number one receiver there. We talked a little bit about Dulcich and Troutman in the first hour. What about the Denver offense just sort of in a vacuum this year as a whole? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm definitely backing on them. I think, there was a little bit of a silver lining last year once Nathaniel Hackett had been fired, that Russell Wilson then was a top 5 quarterback in 2 of the last 3 weeks of the season. Jerry Jeudy for the last 6-7 weeks of the season was producing at the same rate per touch as Justin Jefferson was. He was 2.7 PPR points per touch. And the only difference was that the Broncos were such a horrific team and they weren't able to stay on the field and create drives, whereas the Vikings were doing that. And that was the big difference. And Jeudy was really struggling like that. So I'm in on Jeudy, I'm in on Russ, I'm in on Sutton now, and I'm in on Mims. I think I was in on Tim Patrick. I'd sort of been at about 10-12% of my portfolio was Tim Patrick, because over on 20 round best ball you were getting him in round 20, and it seemed like a nice bet to make. And I feel awful for him at this point, but now you just go, okay, well, Marvin Mims is a clear runway to take off. And
Greg Dulcich, as we talked about before. Yeah, so if you like all those pieces, you kind of have to be in on the quarterback at a certain point. This was the lesson from the Seahawks last year. If you like Tyler Lockett and if you like DK Metcalf, then you probably need to make a bet on one of the quarterbacks.
A guy who co-hosted this show with me 3-4 weeks ago, I can't remember who it was, from the GOAT District, John Daniel. He's one of his phrases, always be stacking. And he likes to get these late round stacks, right, where it's a low cost. Scott Connor, who's actually co-hosted the show with me too, from Dynasty Trades in 5, he likes these late stacks too. And you get one in the Pros versus Joes draft here. Curtis Samuel in the 15th, Sam Howell in the 16th. How much of that was planned? How much of that were you targeting? And what is sort of your portfolio looking like in regards to late round Samuel and late round Howell this year?
Yeah, so Curtis Samuel's a player who won me a good amount of money in championships when he was with the Panthers. He had those years where he was being used in the backfield and he was also being used as a receiver. And he was a versatile player, and then he went out onto the free agency market, made a decent amount of money, and things didn't really seem to click for him necessarily. But I think pairing him with Eric Bieniemy, an offensive coordinator who can be very creative, and also knowing that Sam Howell is going to need somebody close to the line of scrimmage. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are fantastic weapons downfield. I think that those are really going to be explosive. But in PPR format, sometimes you're just looking for somebody who can get you 5 receptions near the line of scrimmage and just stop you from taking a 0 at the position. And Curtis Samuel feels like somebody who can do that. I think it's not a stack which I have a lot of. I'm good friends with Colm Kelly of Rotoviz, and he and the guys over at Rotoviz are very high on Sam Howell, and I've got a lot of respect for them. And when I listen to them talking about how high they are on Sam Howell, every now and again, you just have to take a step back from your own opinions on a player. And for me, Sam Howell wasn't able to earn playing time last year when Carson Wentz was injured, and it took literally Taylor Heineke telling the staff that Sam Howell should start the final game of the season for Sam Howell finally to get his first start, where he completed like 11 out of 17 passes, rushing touchdown on the floor. But if people like Sean Siegel that convinced that Sam Howell can be something special in a 3-quarterback build, I don't mind adding him in.
Bear in mind too, in the 2021, the inaugural FFPC Best Ball Tournament, I don't think I'm making this up. I think this actually, I know it happened. It's a matter of if it happened in 2022 or 2021. I think it was 2021. The Best Ball Tournament, Rotoviz finished 1-2, right? It was Connor O'Driscoll, I think.
Yep. That's right.
First. And then second was Calm and Siegel. It was Calm and Siegel on the same team. And there was
that's right. Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was maybe Mike Beers.
Oh, it could have been Mike Beers. Absolutely, yeah. And it was just wild. Like, we have never had a tournament at the FFPC where it's like it's industry guys right up at the top. It was like the greatest bumper sticker you could ever produce for Rotoviz in history. So that was fantastic. But I know you draft a ton of best ball. You have been very successful at best ball. Pros versus Joes is kind of a unique best ball. You only have 12 teams in that league. Can you kind of speak to larger tournaments? And whether that's in the FFPC or elsewhere, can you kind of tell a little bit about your strategy? Somebody who maybe is looking, maybe not to become a volume player, but to enter it for the first time this year, maybe draft a few teams in a national best ball tournament. What are some tips and tricks from Tom Strachan that they need to remember?
The first thing is always to just take some time to understand the format properly. So I'm a big fan of the FFPC Superflex Best Ball contest. Like, that's one which I'm always drawn to. I think because for years I've played Superflex Fantasy. So for me, it's very easy to transition from just normal Superflex redraft leagues to Superflex Fantasy. So whether it's doing something like that or whether you need to just look at it and go, okay, well, I prefer playing single QB. Mm-hmm. There's so many options out there that, yeah, you just find the ones that are right for you, whether that's starting off on $1 drafts or $5 standalone drafts, bits like that, and just get used to drafting at pace, get used to drafting slow draft, and get used to being thoughtful about your picks. The moment that you start going, okay, what does this pick mean for the rest of my draft? What does this pick mean for my portfolio?
what does this pick force me to be? Like, you can do anything you want in the first 2-3 rounds, but after that point, it becomes, how am I allocating my picks at this point? What kind of structure is it forcing me into? And as soon as you start being mindful like that, you tend to see far better results as you go.
And I think that's important to remember. Stacking is obviously important for you in best ball too, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of stacking. I think Mike Leone have established a run, did some great work this year, looking at these large field tournaments and talking about how, adding stacks increases your win rates, it increases your ability to just go nuclear in the final. Because when we do get to these playoff tournament sort of bits where it's week 15, 16, 17, you have to consider how many people you're playing. Whereas, on the FFPC, some of these tournaments, you're only playing against 50 people. But you look at some of these other platforms, you can be playing against 1,400 other people. And it's much more like an individual DFS contest at that point. So you not only need to be stacking, you need to be looking at your bringbacks and week 17 correlations. And whether that means that you go full sicko mode and you start memorizing the week 15, 16, 17 sort of games, or whether it just means paying it a slight bit of attention, these are all little ways we can give you an edge towards winning.
You know what we got to do, Tom? One of these times we got to get you out to Las Vegas when we have the FFPC live events at Planet Hollywood. We have a single 12-team closed tournament called the Bare Knuckle Tournament, and it's literally 12 people at a table, no phones, no computers, no iPads, no devices, no paper, no pens. It's literally everything in your mind, and you got to make it through 28 rounds of absolute terror in that. And it's a lot. I think a guy like you would just eat that up.
That sounds fantastic.
But we will continue to follow you on Twitter at NFL_T-Strack. We'll continue to listen to the fantasy football and watch the Fantasy Football Sanctuary stream on YouTube, and check out all your work at FantasyPros and Football Outsiders. This has been so much fun tonight, and I understand it's almost 2 a.m. there. I'm going to let you go and let you get some sleep, Tom. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
No, thanks for having me. It's been great.
From across the pond, Tom Strachan from Fantasy Pros, Football Outsiders, and of course, the Fantasy Football Sanctuary. I want to thank him. I want to thank our producer, Anthony Rivera, who held it down behind the glass tonight. Next week, 7-6 Central, we will be here, myself and our colleague, Andrew Cooper at Coupe Fiasco on Twitter or at X from Fantasy Alarm. He will co-host the full 2 hours next week. That's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Pair of $1 million grand prizes up for grabs. $1 million in the FFPC main event, $1 million in the Fantasy Pros Championship. And in that Fantasy Pros Championship, drafts are filling every day, including some yet tonight if you want to get in. $350, and you can turn that into $1 million this year. First time we've ever done that. Make sure you're registering now at myffpc.com, along with the Dynasty Leagues that we have there from $100 all the way up to $5,000. That's going on over at myffpc.com. 1,400 plus leagues, 10 plus years. Not a single league has ever folded in Dynasty. And we got closed 12-team leagues, a couple of best ball tournaments there as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We will be back next week. Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds are up next, only on the Better Sports Network.